Yeah, good afternoon. So in the previous class, we discussed the linguistic scrutiny of the poetry. The linguistic scrutiny of the poetry can't limit itself to the poetic function. Okay, 2 points, two important points he mentioned. Okay, poetic function is not a sole function of the verbal art. That's why we can say when dealing with poetic function, linguistics can't limit itself to the field of poetry. Okay, poetic function is not limited only to the poetry. Even we can find that poetic function in other areas, in other verbal arts or other verbal behaviors. So this poetic function, okay, to study this poetic function, okay, the linguistics should not limit itself to the field of poetry. At the same time, the field of poetry should not limit its poetic function, okay, in linguistics, okay, or that is in language. That means a literary language. Okay, so the linguistic scrutiny of the poetry can't limit itself to the poetic function. Okay, the particularities of diverse poetic genres. There are diverse poetic genres. There are different poetic genres, we can say. Okay, what are they? What are those different poetic genres? Simple thing. The different forms of poetry. The different forms of poetry, such as epic, okay, ode, elegy, ballad, okay, pastoral elegy, sonnet. These are all different diverse poetic genres. Okay, the particularities of diverse poetic genres imply a differently ranked participation of the other verbal functions along with the dominant poetic function. In these diverse poetic genres, okay, we can find different verbal functions may participate. Okay, different verbal functions may involve in that genres. In those genres, different verbal functions may participate in those genres along with the dominant poetic function. Okay, in these poetic genres, the dominant function is poetic function, but the fact is that there are other functions. There are some more functions other than this dominant poetic function. Okay, this is a dominant poetic function is a dominant or primary. There are other functions which can be treated as secondary functions in the poetry or in poetic genres. Okay, that is a fact. So epic poetry, try to understand this, how different functions may be there in different genres. Epic poetry focused on the third person. Okay, because in epic poetry is long narrative poem, you know, epic is long narrative poem, epic is. So the epic poetry focused on the third person, so strongly involves the referential function of the language. In epic poetry, other than the poetic function, other than the poetic function, we can find another function which is strong, that is the referential function of language. The referential function of language. From the epic, we will try to infer more knowledge, more moral values. Okay, more information we may try to infer from that epic. Okay, and in case of lyric, the orientation may be toward the first person. In lyric, okay, the orientation may be okay toward the first person, and is intimately linked with the emotive function. In lyric, we can find okay emotive function. In epic poetry, other than this, in epic poetry, other than this poetic function, we can find the referential function. In lyric, we can find okay the emotive function. Okay, likewise, poetry of the second person. If there is a poetry which has the second person narrative, okay, poetry of the second person is imbued with the conative function. Second person, that is receiver, that's why conative function. Likewise, though the poetic function is strong, though the poetic function is dominant in that poetic genre, still we can find different functions. As we discussed now. That's why we may complement our scheme of the fundamental factors, such as addresser, addressee, context, message, contact, code. Okay, so our scheme of the fundamental factors by a corresponding scheme of the functions. Okay, so that's why I told you to compare the two diagrams. Okay, the function, the factor, the factors and the functions. Okay, so what are the factors? What we discussed now: addresser, addressee, message, context, contact and code. So what are the corresponding functions of those factors? Okay, emotive, conative, referential, poetic, metalingual. Okay, try to recap, try to understand these diagrams. What is the factor? What is its function? Okay, first one is addresser. What is the function of addresser? Emotive function. Okay, next one, addressee, that is the receiver. What is the function of that addressee? Conative function. So next one is context. What is the function of that context? Referential. The function of that context is referential. Then what is the function of contact? That is patic. Okay, that is connecting. So contact, patic function. Then what is the function of code? Metalingual. The function of code is metalingual. That's what we discussed. Then what is the remaining factor? That is message. Okay, for this message, what is the function of this message? Okay, this Roman Jakobson, he introduced the function of message is poetic function. Okay, but he has to prove that poetic function. In case of other 5 functions, it can be easily understood. It can be easily understood. But in case of this message, in case of this poetic function, he has to prove that. That's why we have discussed all these things. In that process, okay, the language, the linguistics, okay, the linguistic phenomena, or we can say the linguistics should scrutinize the language. The linguistics should scrutinize the language for poetic function. Okay, now here the question is, now again he posed a question and he is going to, yeah, this is the common question. This is maybe another criticism. Okay, that's why he has to clarify that. Okay, now he is going to deal with another question, that is, what is the empirical linguistic criterion of the poetic function? What is the empirical linguistic criterion? Okay, a scrutiny may be conducted, no doubt. A scrutiny may be conducted, no doubt, to study poetic function. But the problem is that what is the criteria? What is the criteria to study the linguistic features, the linguistic study? What is the criteria to conduct the linguistic study for this emotive function in the language? Okay, the emotive function in the language. How that linguistic study may be empirical? Okay, so to answer this question, try to understand this question again. What is the empirical linguistic criterion of the poetic function? To study the poetic function, what is the linguistic criteria? What is the linguistic criterion or criteria to study the poetic function of the language? Okay, so if we have a proper criteria to study something, then only we can study. Then only we can study. Okay, so to answer this question, we must recall the two basic modes of arrangement. Okay, arrangement used in verbal behavior: selection and combination. Okay, to answer this question, until now he discussed the factors and their functions. Now he is going to clarify a question. He is going to establish a proper criteria for studying the poetic function of the language in the linguistics. The criteria to study the poetic function in linguistics. Okay, for that he says that to answer this question, okay, we must recall the two basic modes of arrangement. There are two basic modes of arrangement used in verbal behavior. Okay, that is, those two modes are, okay, selection and combination. Selection and combination. Okay, so what is that selection? What is that combination? Right? So, for example, how a writer or how a speaker select the words. For example, if child is the topic of the message, so if you want to speak something about the child, that means the child is the topic of your message, then the speaker, that is you, may select one among the extant more or less similar nouns like child, kid, youngster, tot. Child, kid, youngster, tot. Okay, try to understand this point, dear students. Okay, here we are going to know one thing. There are some words to represent. There are some words to represent. There are some words to represent. Okay, that particular boy. Those words are child. You can use the word child. You can use the word kid. You can use the word youngster. You can use the word tot, T-O-T, tot. Okay, among all these words, as a speaker, you have to select one word. You have to select one word. That is a selection. That is a selection. Based on the topic of your message, based on the topic of your message, based on the topic of our message, we select the word. We select the word. Okay. So at the same time, all of them equivalent in certain respect. And then to comment on that topic, to comment on that boy, to comment on that girl or the child or the kid or the youngster or the toy, whatever the word you may choose, to comment on that particular name or to comment on that particular person, okay, we may select one of the semantically cognate verb, one of the semantically cognate verb. Okay, it is not enough to select the word child. You have to select a proper word which tells the activity of that child, such as sleeps, dozes, nods, naps, like that. Okay, if he is sleeping, you may say he sleeps. The child sleeps. If he is naps, okay, nap. Okay, then we can say here the child naps. The child naps. It is not enough to select a noun. We have to select a verb also. We have to select a verb also. Okay, then these two words, at least these two words, a noun and a verb, a noun and a verb. Now these two chosen words. Now these two chosen words combine in speech chain. Combine in speech chain, right? So now we will connect. We will combine these two words. Child sleeps. Child sleeps, or kids naps, whatever it may, whatever the combination you may select, that is of your choice based on the fact. Okay, then we will combine these two words. That's what happening in verbal behavior. That's what happening in verbal behavior. Okay, in speech we can say. So in this we are combining. Okay, now the selection is produced on the basis of equivalence. The selection is produced on the basis of equivalent. Okay, to represent, for example, to represent a child of 5 years, okay, a boy of 5 years, you should not use the man. You should not use the word the man. You should not use the word the old man. Okay, you should not use the word the middleman. Instead of the boy, you can use the child. Instead of that boy, you can use, okay, kid. Okay, because kid or child or boy is equivalent to that age, Okay, the middleman, old man, or the man are not the equivalent. They are not equivalent, right? That's why the selection is produced on the basis of equivalence or similarity or dissimilarity, synonymity and antonymity. Okay, antonymity. While the combination, okay, see, the selection is based on, okay, the similarity or dissimilarity, synonymity or antonymity. While a combination, that is the buildup of the sequence, the buildup of the sequence out of the words, the buildup of the sequence out of the words is based on the contiguity, that is the adjacent, the relation, okay, the apparent relation or the adjacent relation. Okay, that's why in grammar we will discuss a grammar topic, that is agreement of the subject with verb, concurrence, okay, concordness, okay, that's why we say concurred sentences. Okay, this relation, okay, the adjacent relation, okay, the combination, that is the buildup of the sentence is based on this contiguity. Okay, so here basically there are two modes. One is selection, another one combination. In any verbal behavior, whatever we speak, that is verbal behavior. Whatever we speak, that is verbal behavior, right? So the poetic function projects the principle of equivalence. So this poetic function, based on these points, we can say this poetic function, okay, okay, projects the principle of equivalence, right? So, excuse me. So, the poetic function projects the principle of equivalence from the axis of selection into the axis of combination. Okay, from selection to the combination, we will follow, or this poetic function projects the principle of equivalence. Remember this. This is the principle of equivalence in the selection of words, because there may be number of equivalent words. Among them, we will select one word as our subject. Okay, then the poetry, okay, in poetry, one syllable is, okay, in poetry, one syllable is equalized with any other syllable of the same sequence. In poetry, one syllable is equalized, made equal with any other syllable of the same sequence. Okay, this syllable will be equalized with other syllable. Okay, such as word stress is assumed to equal word stress. Word stress is assumed to equal word stress. Okay, for example, Sri said one thing. Nenoka swargam nadoka durgam. Nenoka swargam nadoka durgam. Gum. Okay, the same word stress or the same syllable. Okay, the equivalent syllable, we can say the equivalent syllable. If we use such equivalent syllables, then we can find this poetic function. Okay, in poetry, we can find such equivalence. Another example, 30 days hath September, April, June, and November. 30 days hath September, April, June, November. September, November. Equivalence there. Okay, the same stress on two words, the same level stress on the two words. Okay, likewise, in the poetry, one syllable is equalized with any other syllable of the same sequence. One word stress is assumed to equal word stress, and a prosodic long, prosody. Okay, in Telugu that is chandasu. Okay, that is in metrical composition, long vowel, okay, is matched with another long vowel. Long vowel is matched with another long vowel. Short vowel is matched with another short vowel. If we match short vowel with another short vowel, long vowel with another long vowel, the word stress with another the same word stress, then we can find the poetic function. Then we can find the poetic function, dear students. So Gerald Manley Hopkins, Gerald Manley, Gerard Manley Hopkins, okay, an outstanding searcher in the science of poetic language. Okay, an outstanding researcher in the science of poetic language. Okay, he researched, okay, in the field of poetic language. Okay, he defined verse as speech wholly or partially repeating the same figure of sound, repeating the same figure of sound. Okay, so any type of speech in which if we can find repetition of the same figure of sound, repetition of the same figure of sound, then it may be a verse. Then it may be a verse. Okay, verse. Okay. See, verse means poetic. Verse means poetic. Okay, or this maybe the dialogue, maybe the speech, or maybe some sentences which are in poetic effect, which has some poetic effect. He says that. Okay, now this Hopkins, Hopkins, Hopkins. He defined verse as speech wholly, 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 wholly or partially repeating the same figure of sound, the same figure of sound. Okay, so repeating in the sense, okay, there may be one rhyming word, one word which has a rhyming with other word. Okay, there may be another word which has rhyming with another word. Likewise, there may be number of words which may be in rhyme. Okay, those number of words may be may fulfill the figure of speech, that is the figure of sound, that may be alliteration, the repeated. Okay, ఓకే, నువ్వు అలా 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 వస్తుంటే నేను ఎలా 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 వెళ్ళాలి అని అడిగారు అనుకోండి. ఓకే, ద సేమ్ వర్డ్ వాజ్ రిపీటెడ్ అగైన్ అండ్ అగైన్. That repetition, okay, will give some sense, will give some poetic sense. Okay, see, you look, you look, you look, you look. Okay, if you repeat the same sound again and again for the 4 times or for the 3 times, in all the attempts, sense is not the same. Look, 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 look. Okay, so the sense, because of the variation of the utterance, even we can find different sense, but still the same word was repeated, still the same word was repeated. Okay, but here this Hopkins, this Hopkins, he questioned one thing. He questioned one thing. Is all verse poetry? Is all verse poetry? Okay, So verse is a speech or a few lines or some sentences which has the poetic effect. The poetic effect. Can we call such two lines or three lines which has some poetic effect? Can we call it? Can we call it as a poem? Can we call it as poetry? That is the question. Can we call it as poetry? Again, a big question. So we have to understand, we have to distinguish poetry and the verse. We have to distinguish poetry and verse. Okay. So see, mnemonic lines cited by Hopkins. Hopkins, okay, brought to notice some lines such as 30 days hath September. 30 days hath September. Okay, solely, okay, 30 days hath September, April, June, and November. April, June, and November. Can we say these two lines? Can we say these two lines a poem? No, we can't say. We can't say. So there may be the poetic lines. There may be the poetic lines, but it is not poem. It is not poem because they are just two words, two sentences. They are just two sentences. Okay, so modern advertising jingles. Modern advertising jingles. Okay, in the trend of this advertisement, in the trend of this advertisement, okay, we can find the poetic expressions. We can find many poetic expressions, even in some notices. Okay, even in some notices. Okay, we can find. Okay, we are the bankers you can bank upon. We are the bankers you can bank upon. The slogan or the advertisement. Yeah, there is some poetic effect. There is some poetic effect. Okay, so, but it is not poem. It is not poem. Likewise, even in the advertisement, we can find such poetic lines, or the lines which has some poetic effect, or the lines which has some poetic effects. Not only in advertisement, even in some notices, such as shoot the birds, but not with the guns. Shoot the birds, but not with the guns. Surely, when we listen that statement, we can feel some poetic function, but still it is not poetry. Still it is not poetry. And versified medieval laws. Versified medieval laws. Okay, you see, Gurram Joshua, okay, he wrote some poetry on this Jesus history, the history of Jesus Christ. Okay, on the Bible, okay, he wrote some poetry. He explained the same story of Jesus Christ, what is available in the Bible, in a poem or in his poetry. In his poetry, Christu Charitram. Christu Charitra. Joshua wrote a book. Okay, the poetry or the poem. Okay, so in that poem, he explained, narrative poem, he explained, but all the statements or all the sentences are in poetic lines. The same idea is available in the Bible in the sentence form, in the prose form, but he versified it. He versified it. In the same manner, in the medieval period, some laws were versified. Some laws were versified. For example, Yadha Raja Tada Praja. Yadha Raja Tada Praja. రాజు ఎలా ఉంటాడు, ప్రజలు కూడా అలానే ఉంటారు. అది డైరెక్ట్గా చెప్పొచ్చుగా, యదా రాజ తదా ప్రజ. వై దట్ versification? Because that versification has some poetic effect. That versification has some poetic effect. Okay, so yeah, such versified medieval laws mentioned by Lodge, L-O-T-Z, Lodge. Or finally, Sanskrit scientific treatise. Sanskrit scientific treatise in verse. Even the older, the ancient treatise in Sanskrit language, they are in verse form. They are in verse form. Even the Vedas, they are in verse form. They are in verse form. Okay, so what can we say? Yeah, that's what we call now slokam. That sloka is in verse form, but it is not poetry. It is not poetry. Vedas are not poetry. Okay, they are okay, ultimate statements. They are ultimate statements in a treatise. Okay, likewise, okay, the Sanskrit scientific treatise in verse are strictly distinguished from the poetry. These are all what we discussed, all this now. That may be mnemonic lines or modern advertising lines or versified medieval laws, and finally Sanskrit scientific treatise in which we can find this versified or verses. We can find versified statements or verses we can find, but these are all strictly distinguished from poetry. These are all strictly distinguished from poetry. That is kavya. Poetry means kavya. All these metrical texts make use of poetic function. In all these metrical texts, we can make use of the poetic function without assigning to this function the coercing, determining role it covers in poetry. We are attributing the poetic function, but that poetic function is not like the poetic function we will determine in poetry. That poetic function is not the poetic function we determine in poetry. In our poetry, that poetic function is different. So what can we understand? Okay, still in verse, though it is not a poetry, still in verse we can find poetic function. What does it mean? Other than the poetic function in the poetry, the same poetic function can be found other than this poetry in other areas, in other verbal behaviors. Okay, so these verse actually verse actually exceeds the limit of poetry. This verse exceeds the limit of poetry. Okay, beyond the poetry, outside of that poetry, this verse can expand. This verse can be available. This verse can exceed the limit of poetry. But at the same time, the verse always implies poetic function. The verse always implies the poetic function. Dear students, here what can we understand? What can we understand? The verse is, okay, verse can extend, the verse can extend beyond the poetry. What does it mean? The verse can be composed in the phase, in the verbal behavior, which is not poetry, which is not poetry. At the same time, okay, this verse implies poetic function other than in poetry. Okay, wherever this verse is composed other than the poetry, surely there it implies the poetic function. It implies the poetic function. From this discussion, what can you understand? From this discussion, what can we understand? We can understand that even beyond the poetry, even outside of the poetry, we can find poetic function. We can find poetic function. But we should remember that poetry is poetry. Poetry is poetry. Okay. Within the poetry, there may be a verse, there will be surely dominantly the poetic function. There will be surely dominantly the poetic function. But in this other fields other than this poetry, in this other fields other than the poetry, we can find the poetic function in verses. We can find the poetic function in verses because the verses can be composed not only in poetry, even in other verbal behaviors. In other verbal behaviors, we can compose the verses. We can compose the verses, dear students. Okay, so from that point, we can understand that verse is different from poem. Verse is different from poem. Okay, verse has a poetic function, and within the poem, that there may be verse and there may be poetic function, but the fact is that even outside of the poetry, we can find the poetic function. Even outside of the poetry, we can find the poetic function, right? So, dear students, okay, here we can find, okay, here we can find the fact that, okay, yeah, excuse me, students, one minute.